later for them to realize that it was like contaminating the earth and the atmosphere.
Right.
So then that problem had already started, but it wasn't that bad yet.
Right.
And we started creating like new ways that contaminated even less. And like we created electric cars and stuff like that. But also electricity can come from the burning of fossil fuels. So it's interesting to take into consideration like which one would be better to use.
Yeah, it is really interesting because you mentioned electric cars, but they run on electricity, right? So that still requires electricity to be made someplace. Electric cars are really great in a city like Portland, a very dense city, because they don't emit pollution that affects your health locally. But that energy that powers that car has to be made someplace. So it may be coming from a power plant that's far away, maybe coming, in this case, from a hydroelectric power station upriver someplace. But you start to look at all these from all these angles, and it's a very sort of complicated picture, right? Because everything we do requires energy. So making that energy in a way that doesn't pollute and doesn't affect the climate is sort of the challenge there. And there are some ways to do it. Wind power is another really good one. Wind uses just the energy in the atmosphere. And that's used a lot. I think in east of the Cascades there's a lot of wind farms, in Washington especially. Southern California has huge, huge wind farms and solar farms. So those are sort of, I think, optimistic things, technologies that can take us away from needing to use all this fossil fuels and things that release carbon and soot and other things into the atmosphere. But it's still sometimes much cheaper to use gas and oil. So money also is important, right?
And do you want to ask the next one?
Sure. Wait. If you could change one effect of climate change in the world, what would it be? Which one and why?
Ooh. That is a good question. Well, the effects of climate change are there's so many of them. And some of them we don't even fully understand. But I think the one that's the biggest is how it affects water. Water is the most essential thing to life. And so climate change could change how much rainfall places get. It could change how much snowfall places get. It could also, when it gets really hot, so if you want to dry your hair or something like that, use a hair dryer, right? It's hotter air, hot, dry air will dry your hair. So if the atmosphere, the weather gets hotter and drier, it's also going to evaporate more water from the land. So that also impacts water supply. So if people start having trouble finding enough water, that's the most important thing. So if I could change one thing, it would be that climate change doesn't affect water supply in a negative way.
Because like water is like the base for all life. If we didn't have water, we would like
Die in 3 days.
We wouldn't be able to grow food. We wouldn't be able to do any of the things we do. So water's really essential.
Well, it would be in between 2 and 4 days without water. Most of our body is made of water.
Yep. And most of what we eat is made out of water.
Yeah.
So, right, we need water for everything.
Yeah,
like an apple.
Interesting to like see the facts on like, so like if you have an apple or like fruits or vegetables, and you look at the percentages of like how much is actually like apple and like how much is water, like you start to realize that like everything is made out of water.
You go around the farms outside of Portland in the summertime, and all those farms are fed not by rain, because it doesn't rain much here in the summer. It's all water from the mountains. So having that snowpack in the mountains, for example, is really important here in Oregon. Last year we didn't have snowpack, and we had a drought as a result. So those things those are hard impacts. So yeah, if I could wave a magic wand, I would get rid of the water problems. If I could only get rid of one thing.
If you could wave a magic wand, yeah. Let's see how that goes.
Granted one wish. Yeah, that would... NSF would like that down at the conference, right?
It's like, all right, we have the magic wand, how do we do this?
Yeah, that would get me... This lab would start to look a lot nicer if I could do that.
It's like, first off, I'm going to change the effects of water. Now I'm going to make this roomier.
Right. That's right.
Okay. So, what are you doing to change the effects of climate change yourself?
Well, in my personal life, I definitely don't. I try to not waste energy. I ride my bike to work almost every day, including this morning, which was miserable, but I did it anyway. And I use public transportation as much as possible when I don't want to ride my bike. I also, my entire career is teaching and studying weather and climate, so I do research to try to answer questions about parts of climate change that we don't know, and hopefully that gives some knowledge to better prepare ourselves or better reduce the effects of climate change. So that's sort of my everyday is thinking about this problem. Not from the technology side, like building a power plant that's better, but what are the effects? What's going to happen from a changing climate? So that's what I do. But the personal lifestyle things are things that I think most people can do. Just trying to reduce. It's called your carbon footprint. How much carbon you produce every day.
Oh yeah, like I've seen like one of those images that show like a carbon footprint with like little parts that indicate like different countries and like how much they contribute to it,
Right.
and it's pretty interesting to see. Like sometimes you wouldn't realize how like some countries like you like go to the country and like it's like a really nice place, but then you like look at the facts and you see that it's like one of the top pollutants in the world.
Well, carbon is interesting. Carbon dioxide is interesting because it's clear, it's odorless, and it's not toxic. So there's really no motivation for a wealthy country to not produce it. If carbon dioxide, so what did we used to use for transportation before cars?
We like use like
Horses,
horses
carriages.
and
And what kind of
carriages.
waste do horses make when they expend energy?
Poop.
Right. So if that was what carbon
Fertilizer,
dioxide was like,
manure.
I don't think we'd be emitting it anymore, right? But because it's clear, it doesn't smell, we can't even tell it's here. It's hard to think about it in your everyday. And so a lot of countries that actually are the most developed countries, like the U.S. or like Europe.
Beijing has a very bad pollution problem.
Yeah, but that's a little bit separate from their carbon dioxide problem. They have a very
Yes.
bad carbon dioxide problem too. But that's why a place that you would think of as not polluted potentially, like England or some, I'm thinking of our very wealthy countries in the Middle East, their carbon footprint is huge because it's not affecting their quality of life to have carbon. But they might not have that dirty, sooty air that you see in Beijing or in India, and places that don't have as much resources to use better technologies.
What would be interesting is like if we could turn like have like something that could turn like carbon dioxide into something that actually smelled to
Right.
or like did something.
Or it was,
to like
bright red or something
kind
like
of just
that, right?
cause a problem so
Yeah.
that people would actually take action against
Right.
it. It'd be interesting if they made something like that.
But then every time we breathe, it would be something terrible, right? Because we exhale carbon dioxide every time we breathe.
Like
It's all around
like
us.
that myth that parents say, don't pee in the pool or else it'll be bright red. Don't breathe or else you'll show that you're breathing.
Right.
You're emitting carbon dioxide. You're part of the problem.
Right. We're a natural part of the carbon
Oh, yes.
cycle. Right? Yeah.
So, what do you think is the most polluted state in the country? How do you think they can change that?
Wow.
And why?
That's a tough question. If you did pollution by person or if you did pollution total, it'd be very different. If you did pollution total, it's probably California. But there's so many people. So if you compared California to Wyoming, it's going to be much more polluted, right? Because there's so many more people in California that are driving cars and eating food and doing all kinds of things.
Just like comparing California to Delaware.
Right. Whereas Delaware's pretty polluted. But they have a lot of industry in Delaware.
Well, it's like comparing California to Rhode Island. Rhode Island is a very,
Very
small
small.
state near the ocean that doesn't have a lot of people in it.
Right.
Well, it has a lot of people in it, but from the standpoint of California compared
Right.
to...
You could a good comparison would really extreme would be like Vermont and California. Vermont is the second least populated state and there's really not a lot of industry, but people have to drive long distances to get wherever they want to go in Vermont because things are spread out. So per person, actually really nice maps of this. They go by zip code. Per person, how much carbon do people make? And if you look at that map, the suburbs have the highest carbon footprint, the cities have the lowest, and the countryside has even higher. So if you were to do it by person, a state that's mostly countryside like Wyoming, even though Wyoming has the fewest people of any state in the country, to get to the grocery store, if you live in Wyoming, you might have to drive a truck through the snow for a really long distance. Whereas in Portland, you can just walk to the store. But then at the
Like
same
walk to the store down the street.
exactly. But then Portland has a lot of pollution because we have a lot of people. So I don't think I answered your question. But I don't know if I have an answer. California probably has the most pollution. Texas is probably also a very polluted state. Lots of people. California has the best pollution regulations to reduce pollution. Texas probably has some of the worst. So in that sense, maybe Texas would be a bad one. New York has big cities, so you'd have a lot of problems in a place like New York too.
Yeah, it's like kind of interesting comparing it because like most people would just like assume like, oh, if you live in the countryside, you live like all organic and natural, but then they don't take into consideration that if you live in the countryside, like isolated from like a lot of things, and you have to like drive a lot,
Right.
that can be like more polluting than big cities where they actually have like factories
Yeah,
and stuff.
per person at least. But if you were concerned about breathing clean air, you'd be better in the
Yeah.
countryside probably.
Yes.
But big cities and states that don't have good regulations are probably the worst places to be. So Texas would be one, maybe Tennessee, big cities in Tennessee or Florida. Those are places that have, but it's very variable too because if you have that lid on your atmosphere like we have here in Portland or they have in Los Angeles all the time, then no matter what you do, you have a lot of pollution because everything sits there. Whereas Miami, which might produce a lot of pollution, always has sea breezes that blow it out. Same with New York City, blows it out to sea. So it's a very difficult question to answer. Someone's probably measured it, but not me.
Here, what organization do you think is helping the most in the prevention of climate change?
Portland State University. No.
Me.
That's a good question. Let me think about that for a minute. I mean, I'm sort of biased towards science institutions that are trying to learn about the problem and better ways to solve it. So in that sense, NASA is a really good one. NASA builds all these satellites that measure what's going on the Earth. It can measure carbon dioxide movement throughout the Earth. So that's a really good one. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association, which is NOAA. That's another really good one. They monitor the climate and the weather. They have an excellent educational resource page called climate.gov. If you're looking for more information, it's a really good website. So I think organizations that fund gaining of additional knowledge on both the science side and then technology side are really powerful. The Department of Energy is another one, surprisingly. Right? The Department of Energy is in charge of energy. To make energy, we make pollution. But as a result, they also fund an awful lot of work on how to make that better. So the Department of Energy is a good one. They fund a lot of good science, too. There are also nonprofits and other environmental groups that do a lot of good things, but I'm much more favorable towards the more scientific points of view. Maybe that's my personal bias, because that's where the world that I live in. But
yeah, so it's good to have both, but like in order to be able to do like protests and like spread awareness, you have to like have the facts.
Right, and there needs to be some good, educated people to do that, because scientists aren't usually the best ones to do that. We can produce the information, but not only are we not usually good at it, most of us don't want to go and protest. It's sort of in conflict with what we're doing sometimes. So there's some do, So those groups that can do that, it's 350.org, I think, is a pretty good group.
We actually got information on 350.org. I've been looking at their website a lot, and they have a really good The Science
Yeah, they're
page.
pretty well informed.
Yeah.
As far as other groups that